Hi everybody, this is Steve, and this is a quick video about the architecture of Synapse and kind of how it works. So what we're going to do real quick is starting at the synapseproject.github.io site. There's a little bit of information here about the product. So I'm just going to click on this first one about Synapse Core and Server and take a look at this diagram. So the architecture of Synapse is split into two pieces, a controller and a node. The controller hosts the REST API endpoint for Synapse. The default API is Synapse Execute, and you can extend that with any other custom API endpoints that you want through command line utility or by writing an API controller and just locating it in the directory. I'll cover that in detail in another video. But for now, suffice it to say that this is where the endpoint is listed. And then also what the controller is responsible for doing as REST API calls come in, then it sources the YAML plans from the data access layer and also enforces the RBAC security. So when you authenticate, it is to the controller, and then the authorization is enforced by the controller. Plans are selected from the DAL. The data access layer can be configured to run in a database, or it can just point to a disk or to source control or any number of other locations. And the plans are fetched from wherever that location is. Then the plans are forwarded over to the node. So the default URI for nodes is synapse/node. That is not configurable. Synapse depends on that URL for its internal processing. So the plan is forwarded over here, and the node is what handles the work. So once the plan is forwarded over here, the node will parse it and execute the workflow that the plan represents. It can act agentlessly against remote resources like servers and databases or other things, or it could act agent-based. If a node is sitting on a server, then it could act locally against that server. So those are options for the basic execution. So the upshot is, for application integration purposes, users or participating in an SOA environment or applications would call the controller to run plans. The node actually does the work, forwards the results back to the controller, and then users, services, or applications pull the controller for results. There's also ways to run a plan. The plans can be run synchronously or asynchronously, either one, but no matter which, the result is always pulled from the controller. The node is designed to be an internal component of Synapse. It's not really designed to be directly accessed by users. The only thing that's available on the node is administration interface and execution. So with that, let's hop over and take a look at the folder structure, and then quickly we'll look at the Swagger interface on these things too, just to kind of get a feel for the URLs that are available. So this information that is on disk here represents a download of the current build of Synapse and an extraction into the controller and node folders, which is a typical way to install Synapse. This is based on the information that is found here in the Quick Start document, which can be watched in its entirety in a different video. But for now, let's take a look at the controller and the node folders and the content that is in them. So the controller is defined by, if you have the server, Synapse Server config.yaml file saying that it's going to be a controller. So if we take a look at this file, here it is. And in particular, it specifies that the role is controller. So if the role were specified as node, it would be that. If it is specified as server, then this instance would be running as a controller and a node both. So what's important about that is only certain files and folders within the installation are required depending on the role. So you can, if you like to have tidy directories, delete files that are not required. And that's basically what these little batch files here do. So if you want to install this as a Windows service, you can run the little batch file, and this one is actually designed to run it as a controller and a node at the same time. So it's just going to run Synapse Server install yes. All right, so if we hop over here and look at the controller only, what this file does is it deletes the node-specific folders that are not required in a controller install and then installs the service. The node version of the batch file basically does the same thing, except it's deleting the controller-specific folders and files. The delete samples command file does exactly what it says. It just deletes files that are shipped in terms of being samples. So let's quickly walk through the folder structure here. The assemblies folder is for custom assemblies that extend the URI scheme of the controller. Auth contains files that are specific to authentication and authorization. If you write extensions to the authorization module, they would be located here. There's SDK information on providing new authorization modules and using them in the Synapse Controller config. So they would be located in this folder if you compose them, and then you can use them. The auto updater is pretty much what it sounds like. In running the auto updater, it will auto update the existing installation. Crypto is where any public or private keys can be stored for encryption and decryption activities at runtime. It's not required to install your stuff here. It's just a convenient place to put it if you like. The DAL folder represents the data access layer. Now this is configuration about the DAL, not the DAL itself. So if we look in this, the default configuration that ships with the controller is for a file system DAL, and that's what's here. In which case it's going to look for its information primarily on disk. So if we take a look at this, it says the DAL is pointing to the file system DAL. And this is basically just for convenience purposes, so you can download Synapse and run it on a machine and kind of test it out without having to commit. You don't have to create a database or anything like that, and when you're done, you can just delete it off of your disk and it's gone. So in any case, it looks for its folders locally, so it's looking for plans and history based on local folders, and for the security, it's looking for that local as well, and that's what we see here. Whoops. That's what we see here represented in this pathing structure. History, plans, and security. But if you don't like those paths, then you can just change these to different paths. So this can be just any path that is recognized. If it's relative, then just make sure that there's appropriate relative navigation information in the URI, or otherwise you can provide a fixed path. So for instance, what's useful about that is if you're running a controller, say one or more controllers across a few different servers in a load balance, and you're running the file system DAL, then you would probably want the plans to be located in a common location. So in doing that, you might create a shared drive in some place like a NAS path or something, and then you would specify that the plans were located there from a fixed full path. Same thing for history. You would probably want the history to be located in one place. History represents the plan execution history itself. In the last video about running the quick start, I have a history file located here, but again, this could be a fixed path and then it would just write out there. All plan execution gets a unique ID associated with it, so you don't have to worry about file name collisions. Same thing for security. Security is by default located with the controller, but that plan can be moved somewhere else. So this security is the built-in security submodule, which is referred to as Suplex. That's a separate open source application altogether, also authored by us, and it is used by Synapse as the security subsystem for the low-level RBAC. So if you're using plan-level RBAC, then that comes from this piece of Suplex. It is located here. If you're not using that, then this whole folder is irrelevant. So pressing on, handlers. This is for the controller, the assemblies folder is required and the DAL folder is required. And if you're running as a node, then you can just delete those. When running as a node, the handlers folder is required. And if you're running as a controller, you could delete this. So looking in the handlers, what's located in this folder is just a bunch of files that represent the technical capability of Synapse. So if you ever compose a new handler, you would want to locate it in this folder. So these are pulled up by the node at runtime. You can move the handlers folder itself. There's a detailed document in the help files about how to relocate the files and folders of Synapse. I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. So there's some folders you can move just through the pathing of this, and other folders you have to edit a separate configuration file. And that is located, let's hop back, whoops, sorry about that. So let's go up one folder, we're in the controller folder. So if we look, Synapse Server exe config, this one is a little different. So this specifies .NET runtime configuration, and it specifies down in the bottom here where to find this. So it is actually possible to change this path from here. And like I said, there's a detailed article on how to relocate that path if you want to make it a shared folder. All right. And then lastly, logs. So when the application is running, it will log locally here. This path can also be changed. It is also in the Synapse Server XE config. So if we look here, this just uses straight up log4net logging right off the shelf. Nothing exciting about that. Specifies where to use the where to locate this. So by default, the log files are generated with a machine-specific suffix on the log file name, so you can move all the logs to a common folder and then not have to worry about name conflicts between different instances of Synapse using the same log file name. So this is identical to if you're running Synapse at the prompt, then the logging goes to the console, which comes out of the console appender configuration here. Or if you're running it as a Windows service, then it'll be using the rolling file appender. But otherwise, they're basically the same. So all that said, when you run in one mode, you could delete the files associated with the other. That's not required though. I think that's about it for the low-level configuration information file folder layout. Let's hop over and look at the Swagger interface real quick and just get a feel for that. Okay, so if we hit the Swagger UI really fast here, just take a look at this and just cruise through the UI real quick. So this is the controller thing, the controller interface. So if we look at this, all of the methods that are represented here can also be executed via a CLI. So there's a Synapse Controller.cli and a Synapse Node.cli. So if we take a look at those just super fast. There we go. Try again, Synapse Controller CLI, got that. All right, let's look at this really quickly. The methods that are represented here can all be executed via these HTTP actions list. And this lists all of them, and they correspond to something that's on the Swagger interface here. Same can be said of the node. So if we look at the Synapse Node CLI, same. So there's the HTTP actions. Each one of these represents actions that can be found in the node. So if we just grab a look at the list of those actions, here they are. And so that's all this stuff. Now, mostly the node is designed to be executed by the controller, managed by the controller. But there are a few manual actions you might want to take from time to time. For instance, if you're stopping all of your services, say for maintenance activity or something to that effect, you can drain stop a node. Drain stop will leave the node running until all executing plans have finished, and then it'll stop the node, check the queue count, a couple things like that. One more thing to point out, a few actions are represented in the admin interface, so this exists in both controller and node mode. So when running here, a few basic activities are pulling logs, checking out the auto update logs or kicking off auto update altogether, and then some smoke test kind of things hitting hello, who am I, and about will dump the configuration of the controller or node itself, show you all the log files that are present, things like that. All of these URIs can be secured via the Synapse authorization setup, which will keep prying eyes from snooping around your controller or node interfaces. And I think that's all the main things I wanted to cover in this video, is just swing through the architecture really fast, talk about the folder structure, and show where the URIs are and how they can be represented via the CLI. All right. All that said, thanks for listening, and I'll pop a few useful links down in the description. That's all.